Throughout 2014, the alcohol-related criminal behavior of National Football League players created a string of public relations disasters for the NFL. Hi, I'm Bruce Lee Livingston, Executive Director and CEO of Alcohol Justice. In this installment of Stories of Alcohol Justice, we have a deep and honest conversation with former NFL player Eason Ramson about alcohol, advertising, professional sports, and their influence on his life and on players, fans, and kids. In 1982, Eason Ramson was on the Super Bowl championship San Francisco 49er team. Over the next 10 years, his career ended. He pawned his Super Bowl ring, and he nearly went to prison for life, all fueled by substance use and addiction.
Love yourself. People who love themselves don't use drugs and alcohol.
All right. Great to see you, Eason.
Good morning.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work here at the YMCA?
I am the Senior Director for Youth Development, Youth and Teen here at the Bayview Hunters Point YMCA. I started here as a director/principal to organize and develop a program called Center for Academic Reentry and Empowerment, which is a CARE program. And that program, what we do is we work with youth who are disconnected from their educational path, and we help them get re-engaged, put them back on track, and our objective is to transition them back to San Francisco Unified. The older population, we transition them to 5 Keys so that they can graduate here in-house.
And 5 Keys is the charter school
5 Keys
program?
Charter School, yes.
Fantastic. And they're disconnecting in terms of truancy, doing their schoolwork, and sometimes they have alcohol and drug problems?
Well, alcohol and drug problems are usually the leading causes why they're disconnecting. It's because they resorted to some type of substance to pad or cushion their weight so that they call it manage their emotions, but
they call it self-medication.
Self-medication, absolutely.
Right. So you bring your experience with drugs and alcohol to them, and you're very honest about that.
Absolutely, and that's what we call cultural competency, and meeting them where they are. I understand the paths that they've traveled, and we engage them and meet them where they are and work with them and build them up and addressing those issues and help them transcend those barriers.
So tell me a little bit about what it is that happened in your background before you became a professional football player. What brought you into alcohol and drugs, and how has that influenced your life?
Well, alcohol and drugs was my first experience with experimenting
Sure.
with alcohol and drugs was during my freshman year in college. I stayed away from it in high school. But when I got to college, I got away from home, away from mom and dad. Got on my own. I had a roommate that smoked pot every day,
Right.
and smoked it around me. And eventually, the peer influence, I caved in and started to experiment myself.
So you started with marijuana?
Started with marijuana, and shortly after that, because of the parties on Fraternity Row and all the frat parties and kegger parties, I started to experiment and drink beer. And that led to me getting so involved and so off track until I almost flunked out of my first semester in school.
And you were already on the football team too?
Yeah, I was there on full scholarship. You don't maintain your grades, you lose your scholarship.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were regularly using marijuana and beer, and did you start hitting heavier liquor? or other
Not
drugs at that time?
Not at that time. No. I was just, you know, I was experimenting. That lasted less than about halfway through the semester, about half a semester, 3 months. And I saw the effects, and I didn't want to lose my scholarship, so I got a new roommate.
Right.
and I refocused and I regrouped with the people I was hanging around with and got back on track.
So when did you join the NFL?
1978, I was drafted to the NFL.
Did you finish college and then you were drafted?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so what was your experience with alcohol and drugs in the NFL? Now, when did it start going downhill?
Okay. Well, you know, I tell this story.
I appreciate you telling this.
I tell this story when I'm doing workshops with youth and working with them around peer pressure, because it's a classic example of peer pressure that influenced me to start using drugs. And I just made the team. Went out, and they all invited me out that first week, invited me to go to a club and celebrate. And I was so stoked about, you know, guys I've been watching since I had been in high school. Now I'm on the team with them, and they're, you know, I'm building this rapport with them, and they're asking me to be a part of their group, you know. So I jumped in, you know, and I went out with them. I partied with them, and about, you know, an hour and a half into the night, one of them came over to me and says, "Hey, E, check this out, man. Meet us in the restroom in about 15 minutes." Okay, you know, and I had no second thoughts about it. I didn't know why they wanted me in the restroom. Whatever. Okay, these are my peers. I rushed myself to the restroom. I actually got there before them. I'm waiting, posted. When they showed up, they formed a little semicircle around me. My back was to the wall, and they all, each one of them hugged me and congratulated me. He says, "You know, you're one of us now." And in that process, while they were doing that, one of the gentlemen reached in his pocket and he pulled out a little vial. And that vial had white substance in it. He screwed the top off, and there was, on the end of that top, there was a chain and a little spoon at the end. He took that spoon and he dipped it back into the vial. Now, I got me in a semicircle. My back's against the wall, and he put that up to my nose. So, welcome to the NFL. Right. Peer pressure at its finest. Totally. You know, and when this peer pressure is there, you got about 1/10 of a second to make a decision. And in that moment, they're doing it. They have the fame, the fortune, everything that I've ever aspired for. I said yes. Of course, I'd seen drugs and seen what it did to people, but now I'm with successful people. They're doing it. I tried it. And I experimented that day. And I identified it immediately with success. So the more games we won, the more I partied. And party was including cocaine. Right. And what I noticed when I started doing that cocaine, that I get a little going too fast, so I needed something to keep me in the middle. Drink hard liquor. And when I started drinking, it kept me in the middle. I could manage, you know, what I was doing, and I just kept going deeper and deeper over the years.
Right. So this affected your ability to perform as a player, too, right?
Yes, it affected my ability to perform. Affected my whole life. It affected my whole life, you know, and actually, you know, Bill Walsh called me into his office, into a meeting after about 3 years, and you know, and he noticed that, you know, things were really changing with me, and he says, "Hey, you know, Eason, I want to help you. Well, I'd like you to tell me what's going on." You know, and he was reaching out to me the best he knew how. They didn't have things the interventions that they have now and the support they have now. he was reaching out to me, and I told him, you know what, I'm good. Everything's okay, you know. And at this point, I had been with the 49ers for 5 years, you know, and I had,
right.
you know, established myself as, you know, from my hard work and you know, somebody that would help people and a leader, you know.
Right.
And after our conversation, I told him I was okay. Shortly after that, I was called back and they told me they traded me to Denver Broncos.
So, so you feel that it affected your performance on the field, affected your personal life?
Affected everything,
and
every part of me.
Using the ups and downs of various drugs and alcohol to moderate the influence?
Yep, and the alcohol was what I used to moderate, and it only put me in deeper problems.
Now, would you say you were addicted to cocaine and alcohol?
I was addicted. Yes. Yes.
And at that time in the NFL, they did not have interventions. They didn't have random drug testing. How did you avoid that?
None of that. They didn't have it then.
But they knew.
They didn't have it then.
But the teams knew.
But they didn't test us.
Right up the management. So the management knew, and the folks at the NFL must have known that there was ubiquitous use of drugs and alcohol.
Yes.
By the players.
Yes. Yes. But that testing didn't come into effect until later on, after my career.
Do you think the usage is more now than before, or less? How have things changed in the league?
I think it's the same. I think it's in terms of people are using just as much. I think I think it's becoming more of an issue because it's finally been exposed.
It's been exposed. It's out in the
it's
public
finally
eye now.
in public eye. Now it's like, okay, what's going on? And now it's an issue to put out there, you know. And before it was something that was kind of, you know, swept under the carpet,
right.
You know, kind of put in your little personal folder that didn't go out.
Right.
Now it goes out and because it's an issue and it should be, you know.
Right. It's really out there, and it probably happened before, right? But you think it needs to be discussed?
I think it needs to be discussed, and I think what needs to be brought out is, you know, the factor that alcohol has in all of those crimes.
Exactly.
Those crimes, you know. Alcohol is usually a factor in all of these domestic violence and all these murders. Somebody had a drink. Somebody binged.
Right.
Alcohol is America's #1 problem with drugs.
We certainly agree with that. It is the #1 drug of choice for youth in America and for Americans, and led by beer.
Yes, yes, and not only being the number one drug and #1 problem, but it's now recognized as the gateway that's leading all of these teens and adults to a harder substance. Victim to false pride, and I medicated, you know, myself with alcohol and drugs to the point I was totally out of control, and to the point where I was homeless, to the point where I was facing 3 strikes. And
you almost sold your ring. Show me your
ring. I actually pawned my ring and the ring stayed in a pawn shop because I pawned the ring because I wanted money for more drugs, okay? And when I pawned my ring, you know, there's an interesting story behind it because the gentleman who had my ring connected with me years later, and he says he wanted me to know that he still had my ring and that he had read about me and knew that I was in prison, and he wanted me to know that he was going to keep my ring, and if I didn't turn my life around and I didn't make it through, he was going to give it to my daughter or my son.
That was a great person that did that for you.
Yeah.
Now, another person who came around back for you was Bill Walsh.
Yes, Bill, like I said, I was facing 35 to life on my third term in prison. I spent most of the 90s, all of the 90s, 10 years locked up, in and out. And on my third term, I was facing 35 to life. And it was in Sacramento. Bill Walsh showed up at my arraignment. And he asked for permission, asked the court permission to speak. I hadn't seen Bill for years.
Right.
And when he stood up that day, I'm sitting there in orange, handcuffs. You know, I'm like, oh. When I saw him there, I was so embarrassed, I just dropped my head. I was already at the bottom, the lowest point of my life, and I'd already given up, right. Just given up. He spoke about a man that he knew, the Eason Ramson that he knew, that came out and tried out for the team, and how the energy and the work and the fabric of the person that I was when I was there, and what he saw in how I helped other people, and what I did for homeless people. He knew that I would go out and do turkey drives and,
right.
and food drives and give back to the community. And he really admired those things about me, but then he saw the change. And when he spoke that day, I broke down in tears. I had already dropped my head and I'm just crying the whole time he's speaking. Wow. Because I wasn't that person anymore.
But you are that person.
And that moment I vowed, I'm going to do whatever it takes to change. I'm going to do whatever it takes to change. And I didn't know what the future was going to hold for me, but I said, I'm going to change. Whether I get out of here or I stay here in prison. Right. And shortly after that hearing, I was notified that the judge had commuted that 35 to life to 28 months with half time. And when I found that out, I knew that I was going to go back to the streets. I took immediate action, contacting Walden House here in San Francisco.
A recovery house.
Yeah, because I wanted to get help. I didn't know how to do life clean and sober.
So you had never done a clean and sober program or a 12-step program before that?
I had done them, but I did it because I had to.
Right. I
didn't do it because Eason wanted to, or Eason wanted to change. And at this point, I became willing to do whatever it takes to change. And I became willing to take the small steps necessary.
Right.
And that was 15 years ago.
So what would you tell a young player today, say somebody who might be having, I don't want to mention any names, but somebody who might be having some issues with drugs or alcohol and those problems that come with it, domestic violence, DUIs, not paying attention?
My message to that person would be to ask for help. And I understand that when we're in our false pride, in our male role, that it's a very hard thing for us to do. But if you can ask for help, you can change all of those things that are happening and you're doing to other people. You can change. You can unlearn the behavior if you ask for help.
And don't give in to those peers.
You don't give in to those peers. You ask for help, you learn how to change the people that you hang around with. The message I drive home for them is to regroup and hang around the people they want to be like.
The right people.
Hang around the people they want to be like, and most of all, love yourself. You can't.
Beautiful message. Beautiful message.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I got emotional.
That's wonderful, and
you.
You're a great person. I love what you do for the community.
Thank you.
The league's inability to deal with numerous incidents of alcohol and drug-related domestic violence, child abuse, drunk driving, and even homicide point to a culture of indifference, fostered in large part by profits derived from beer advertising, sponsorship, branding, and sales during sporting events.